it's maybe 10 years since we did the big 1.0 release. Yeah, it was a different world back then, right? Like web scraping is very, very different now. So if you rewind back then, there really wasn't any good open source tools for web scraping. There wasn't even any good closed source tools for web scraping. We tried everything, tried every solution, and just couldn't find anything that really worked for us. But the core framework that you have now, that same architecture dates right back to that couple of weeks of programming 2 years ago. Most people would say AI is not working. In fact, I had quite a few people say to me, Shane, you're a bad CEO. Why are you spending all our time on this AI stuff? It's never going to work. A couple of months later, after they use ChatGPT, then it's, Shane, why are we so behind on AI? We should be doing more with this.
This interview is brought to you by databoutique.com, a marketplace for web data.
Hi everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Scraping Insights. Today, here with me, there's Shane Evans, CEO of Zyte. Hi Shane, how are you?
Hi Pierre, I'm great, thanks. How are you?
Fine, thank you. It's just a pleasure to have you here. We met last year at the Strat Summit. It was a great event, and I'm sure that we will talk about the next events you are planning in the next months. But before that, I know that just to start, let's start with a brief introduction about yourself for the few people who don't know you.
Okay, well, look, I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Zyte. My background is as an engineer. I used to work in a few areas, but I think I'm probably here because of my web scraping journey, which started now, I think, probably properly around 2005, 2006.
So such a veteran. I know that at Zyte you are quite busy in these days because you are celebrating also the 10 years of Scrapy. So you are in the team that started the project of Scrapy.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about Scrapy, the early days stories, how it started, who was in the team, how was to create such a successful project?
Yeah. And look, it's maybe 10 years since we did the big 1.0 release. But I think Scrapy itself, maybe 2007 or something. And yeah, it was a different world back then, right? Like web scraping is very, very different now. So if you rewind back then, there really wasn't any good open source tools for web scraping. There wasn't even any good closed source tools for web scraping. And I was at a startup. I think the tech team was just me and the CTO. So it was really early, pre-revenue. And we started building out the product. And we had maybe a couple of developers. We hired a couple of developers and we needed data. And I never wanted to do web scraping. I just wanted the data. I had so many things to do to build a startup, as I'm sure you're aware of. The last thing you want to be doing is writing a bunch of fragile scraping code. So we tried everything, tried every solution, and just couldn't find anything that really worked for us. This was e-commerce websites. And often sometimes we had a relationship with them and they would say, yeah, we'll give you our data. But it was never a priority for engineers for them to do the engineering work to feed us data to a no-name startup that doesn't even have a product yet. So, we had no choice. So yeah, look, we said, look, okay. I think the CTO hired one or two freelancers and it was a mess of fragile scripts and things that didn't work. So I said, look, just give me a couple of weeks. Let me try and crack this in a reasonable way. And that was it. I wrote Scrapy in that time. I got the first version up and running in a couple of weeks. But the core framework that you have now, that same architecture dates right back to that couple of weeks of programming. Yeah. And of course we made it quite extensible from the start. So there wasn't much of a team because I didn't have much of a team then. But yeah, we hired the early team were actually all based in Ukraine. So these were our developers. We worked with an outsourcing company there. So yeah, first 6 months, I think we had some people from Ukraine. I remember a guy called Alexander Filipov was the web scraping lead, that we hired and put in. And yeah, they helped build the framework a little bit, but it was mostly writing Scrapy spiders. Back in those days, we just had a base spider and the framework was much more crude than it is nowadays. But nevertheless, it worked and we were able to scale it. And we also had a startup to build and we couldn't hire enough people in Ukraine. And that was when we looked for more people to work with. And that's when I found Pablo, who is my co-founder now at Zyte. He had started a company, an outsourcing company providing web scraping, or not web scraping services, just Python programming. So they were doing kind of Django apps and those types of things, or just getting started doing it. So we hired them, good engineers, and we thought, okay, let's use these guys. Their core skill is Python, so let's use these guys on the web scraping side. Before long, Pablo and Daniel and some of the engineers were kind of the core engineers working on web scraping. And Pablo became the project lead then for the web scraping. So that was the really early team. And actually, some of that team are still in Zyte now. Andres Moriera, Martin Oliveira, different roles, had different careers in Zyte. Martin's still in the web scraping, though, still doing similar thing. But yeah, that early team, were a lot of the guys from Uruguay, and that was it. Of course, we kept going with the web scraping in MyDeco. We wrote 1,000 spiders for e-commerce websites, and that was just in the UK. And then I was doing other stuff as well. I was building our product, doing a lot of fancy stuff with machine learning and stuff. It was great fun. But about a year or two later, the CEO said, Shane, we're going to launch in the US. I said, okay, great. That sounds awesome. How many websites do we need to launch in the US? So about 4,000. So, okay, interesting. Can I have more engineers? No. Okay, that's going to be a challenge. So this is when, we started playing around with other approaches, supervised learning, etc. And we managed to build an approach where we could handle some of the websites that way, a reasonable amount. And we got, so we ended up doing about 1,000 UK websites, about 4,000 US websites, e-commerce websites. And then that took us up to about 2010. And I think during that year was when I realized that despite solving a web scraping challenge and one or two other technical stuff, the product itself, the company itself really wasn't going to be a success. So I thought, look, it's time to move on. And I realized, look, we'd solved a really useful problem with web scraping. I thought we could solve it better. Yourself, you need way more than just a web scraping framework to do this, and to do this well at scale. So I thought, look, wouldn't it be great to solve that problem that I wish somebody else solved? And that's, I guess, the journey from somebody who never wanted to work on web scraping to somebody who actually wanted to solve this problem and co-founded a company to do it.
Great. Such a great story. I remember those early days on web scraping because I started, I think, in 2010 and 2011 to scrape real estate listings. And since there was no framework at that moment, we created a lot of C++ code with curl, libcurl, and well, it worked because at the time there was no anti-bot protection, so it was so easy that even those code in C++ worked. But yes, when we discovered Scrapy, I think it was no later than 2015, 16. I suppose we started using it at scale at Reanalytics. And yes, it was a game changer for us because the code in Python, generally speaking, was way more easier for us to fix and to write than C++. And then you had all you needed at the moment, the throttling, the concurrent requests, the various settings that were made for scraping that. So yes, it became a cornerstone, I think, in the web scraping industry in general.
That's great. A lot of people persist with homegrown web scraping solutions instead of adopting something that's open source that you can contribute to if it's not perfect, but it's so much better. And look, it's been the philosophy behind Scrapy was to try and make it as easy as possible for the people using the framework. Python may not always be the easiest, asynchronous programming, etc., to write the framework in. But that was never a concern because you just burn so much more hours writing Scrapy spiders, writing per website logic that really, I think one of the other good things was that we made it very extensible and very configurable. So there's a lot of other great stuff that's been contributed around it to solve a lot of common problems.
Yes, I also created a small middleware for proxy rotation. I'm not even such a great programmer. So basically it was so configurable that I was able to do so. It's great. And was there a moment in your career where you find out, okay, Scrapy has gained so much attention, so much popularity that it could become the foundation for a business? When did you have this feeling?
Yeah, it was really kind of towards the end of my time in the startup. And it wasn't necessary. I mean, it was a big motivator for my co-founder, Pablo, to keep working with Scrapy. I was a bit more focused on, I just want to solve this problem. Like, this is way too hard. It nearly cost me the startup. I knew other people with the same problem. I think the Scrapy's popularity was also a good indicator that this was a growing problem for people. And the fact that I've been working with data, with machine learning, etc., also was part of the reason why I thought this would be more important in the future. That web data was a great resource. I'm sure we can do great stuff with it, and machine learning and AI now, obviously, yeah, that's proved to be the case. But those are also kind of strong motivations. I think Scrapy was great help bootstrapping our business, because when we started Zyte, nowadays, right, Zyte offers, most of our business is SaaS subscription model. We have a lot of products, as well as we offer data. We gather data for customers. But back then, we didn't have anything, and we were able to just start by consulting. So around Scrapy, people would have a problem, they'd research it, they'd find Scrapy, and then a very small proportion of them would find us and say, hey guys, we're really not experts here, can you help us? And that was enough to bootstrap a business and get started. And then all of our early products, we wrote them, well, maybe not even the early ones, we still do it, but we solve our own problems too. We have a large team, probably the largest in the world, of people writing web scraping code. So the kind of problems we encounter every day, we're really quite close to that. And as well as being close to our customers. So we tend to write our products to try and solve problems that we have and that we experience.
Great. And as a founder of a company in the web scraping industry, what are the main challenges for you for growing a company in this space that according to you are different than, let's say, doing a traditional SaaS business or something like that? Do you think that there are some specific issues in running a company in this field?
Yeah, there's quite a few. So where to start? Obviously, I'm interested in your opinion on this as well. There's a few, right? I think one thing I wanted to tackle early on was web scraping best practices. And, let's say that for start, back when we started Zyte, the legal landscape was less clear than it is now. And that has helped. Yeah, as things have evolved, there's been a few cases, and that has helped clarify how we should interpret the various laws like the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, etc., for web scraping. But so this has helped, but we do operate in this space where there's maybe a wide diversity of opinions around what's good practice. We've tried hard to put out really good material to have the best legal experts. I know Sanaya contributes to your blog, which is really another source of good content. But a lot of stuff out there isn't, or at least certainly wasn't a few years ago. When people say ethical web scraping, they mean very different things, right? They can often just mean that the IPs are ethically sourced, but they can go very hard and not at disruptive rates against websites sometimes. So we've tried hard to address that, first by making sure we have our own best practices, but then secondly, by doing things like hosting extract summits. Part of this was to kind of help align our industry around good practices. Both, one was from the kind of web scraping best practices, as well as maybe technical approaches, to learn from each other. And, that's certainly been one thing we've adopted. I think another challenge in our industry is that it's very fragile, right? What we do, right? Web scraping, it's not like you write code and it'll always work. This is where you have websites gets blocked, websites constantly change. It can be, it can be a bit stressful and a bit difficult. I remember recently speaking to a CEO who became a CEO in this industry, and he's saying, "How do you do this?" And I'm aging running this company, because there's some challenges that you don't necessarily have in other spaces. I'm sure you're familiar with all of this as well, right?
Yeah, totally. I have the same feeling, because the main issues I found in these years of building several companies in the industry is that, of course, the legal aspect you mentioned, because every time we went to a founder or a potential customer, they asked us, is this legal? And, sometimes there's a lot of disinformation, or probably people is not also aware that what's legal and what's not. And of course, web scraping is like hammer. We always say that. So depends from the best practices you use, if you use them or if you don't use them, of course. The other thing is that you mentioned also is that it's all fragile. So sometimes building a company in the web scraping industry is like building a consultancy company in general, because it's hard to resell the same product you're doing. Let's say you're doing a scraper for a customer. It's very rare that you're reselling the same scraper for another customer. So at the end of the day, even if you're selling dashboards, if you're selling insights on top of your data that you scraped, it seems always like a consultancy job. And this makes the funding rounds or even the value perceived from potential investors in the company, the company doesn't seem so attractive, because as I mentioned, it's a consultancy company that it's difficult to scale.
Yeah, your margins will be lower. You'll be doing a lot of bespoke work, and I think that's a really good insight, and probably one you encountered a bit with the data boutique, I'd imagine, right? I think people from the outside often assume that there's going to be a much higher degree of data or code reuse than what happens in reality, because even if somebody else wants data from the same website, it may not necessarily be the same data. In fact, quite often it's not. They might want a slightly different schema. They might want slightly different sections of the website. If the website's large, it's not feasible to crawl the whole thing every day, perhaps. They might want it delivered at a different frequency. They might want it fresh. So data reuse is a tough problem. So, you need a certain scale. Obviously it's not I think it's probably not a solution that will work in all cases anyway, but there's maybe sweet spots where it works. And code reuse is similar, right? We see some element of code reuse, but it's much smaller than most people would imagine from the outside. It's not huge. And then even caching data, similarly, there's always people who want to reuse. They want fresh data. You're right. Like, that's very insightful. It can be quite challenging. I mean, we obviously, the infrastructure side is where, and we have hosting, we have, web scraping APIs, etc. The one path to a better solution for this, I think, is AI, where there's kind of genuinely, and we're really seeing this, is we're genuinely reducing the amount of time it takes per website now. But I think that's probably, for us, at least in my view, that's the solution to this, where we get more reuse, where we can rely more on technology. And it becomes less like a consulting business, as you said. But that's been one of the big challenges. And, I've had we've had several attempts at cracking this. And so far, I think the AI is the most successful so far, but I'd still say it's not done yet.
Yeah. Yes, you're totally right. As an example, in Data Boutique, we are perfectly aware that we won't cover the 100% of cases of people that want to reuse the same dataset, but at least if you're building, let's say, a price monitoring tool, you need prices. So at least the prices, let's try to cover that. Or, I don't know, location stuff and whatever, but it's tough, but we are seeing some interest and growing business in that. But you mentioned AI, and yes, I totally agree that it can be a game changer in the industry. Also, I tried the Zyte API, and especially for if you compare to traditional web scraping, where you need, let's say you have 100 different websites to scrape, and in traditional web scraping you need 100 different scrapers, and it will take months for you. Of course, depends from the from the size of the company, but generally speaking, it will take months, if not weeks, to create all these scrapers. While with Zyte API tools that have AI inside, these costs and times can be dramatically reduced. And of course, I think you've seen the benefits of using it in the first hand.
Yeah, absolutely. So as it currently stands, what we publicly have released, if let's say you're scraping 100 e-commerce websites, and if we were to do it, the nice things about using AI is you can run it and it will produce data for most of them, right? So you'll get something up and running really super quick. But then then it depends on your quality threshold, because the AI scraping isn't 100% correct, right? When you deploy it, at least not yet. But so then it depends, but you need to close that gap. And for us, closing that gap is, again, you just use Scrapy, use all our open source tools. But you can write these little extension pieces to cover anything where the AI doesn't get it correct. So we've reduced our time is for, let's say, the sweet spot where it works well on this kind of example of 100 e-commerce websites and nothing too exotic what you're doing, your fairly typical use case. We're at about a third of the development time we would have been 2 years ago. So that's really hugely significant. For years of chasing very small efficiency gains, to now see these kind of magnitude of improvements. It's very exciting.
Yes, I totally agree, because of course we don't have still the silver bullet for web scraping. It would be nice to have it, but of course I see that AI is transforming the way we are approaching to web scraping. I was not 2 years ago. I was not that positive on I didn't have a positive feeling about that, because I said, the web has such a long tail of websites that it will be impossible to have something that works well for the vast majority of cases. But I've seen that the results are getting better and better. Each new model, each new tool that is coming out. So I think that we are near to a point where, let's say, we can cover the 80% more or less of the use cases we have. So just like the Pareto split. So with just one tool, with 20% of effort, we can cover the 80% of cases that we lead. And then, of course, we have to rely to traditional techniques or other tools to cover the remaining 20%.
Yeah, I think you're totally correct. And I think your opinion is very typical of a lot of people in the industry as well. 2 years ago, most people would say AI is not working. In fact, I had quite a few people say to me, Shane, you're a bad CEO. Why are you spending all our time on this AI stuff? It's never going to work. And a couple of months later, after they use ChatGPT, then it's, Shane, why are we so behind on AI? We should be doing more with this. But it seems that the whole industry has gone through that change, and even early on when we launched the AI extraction inside API, a lot of people, there was just this overwhelming skepticism from developers about it's just never going to work, right? This is a toy. But I think everybody's opinion has changed now, where people are saying, okay, it's really starting to, and I think people are accepting as well. Maybe some of this, it was overhyped early on, AI is doing everything, and we didn't use the word vibe coding back then, but, people were kind of thinking, or it was being sometimes marketed like that. But there's a pragmatic middle where it does, maybe there's an 80-20 is where we're going.
And how AI is integrated in the Zyte API? Do you have your own models? Do you use commercial models? You have a mix of them? How does it work?
We have a mix. Yeah. So we have commercial models. We have our own model, as well as a bunch of machine learning components. What you see now when you use it is primarily machine learning. So it's quite fast at scale and quite adaptable. But we're, I think, leaning more and more heavy on commercial models that do code generation. I think as the capability increases, it's getting good now. But it's a mixture. Zyte's a mixture. Yeah.
Yeah, I tried my experiments in generating the code with cursor, and I tried to make it generate the code for a Scrapy project. So basically, giving him some rules, some my personal best practices to generate a scraper. Let's say using spot selectors and not CSS selectors and stuff like that, and templates on the output structure. I was quite amazed that it worked. Yes, I would say the 80% of times when I say to him, okay, let's start from scratch. Let's create this Scrapy spider, and he created the whole project, the whole Scrapy structure, the correct files, and I was amazed that it was working from in less than 10 iterations. I had a full scraper working just like I will did it, or maybe better, I don't know. But it was incredible.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. It's really, it's exciting.
We mentioned that at the moment AI is not covering the whole use cases. According to you, why Scrapy is still relevant today in the ecosystem?
Yeah, I think it's kind of solving a fundamental problem at the core of web scraping. And because it's been quite extensible, there's no real reason to redo that and resolve it. You know, it's a bit of the Unix philosophy of do one thing and do it well. I think you can build, like I've built several AI scraping solutions on top of it, or other things we have at Zyte as well. But it still solves this core problem, and there hasn't really been a better way to do it. That's probably the main thing. And look, the other part is there's a really good ecosystem around it, right? So you've got a lot of people writing quality code, people are writing books about, quality other projects you can use with it. People are writing books, training, lots of good materials. So I think all of that makes it still very, very popular and still very useful. And of course we keep moving with the times too.
Yes. And will we ever see a middleware with the ChatGPT embedded in Scrapy, or it's a long
yeah, shot? I don't know. I guess it depends. Like it's it's interesting. The kind of scraping you're talking about, like the better approach. You don't really want to be calling ChatGPT in real time, or calling LLMs in real time. It's very expensive. You generally want to be generating code or doing something like that. We do have use cases where people do need to use ChatGPT or LLMs on a per website basis, usually using very small models, or, sometimes we have some we've done ourselves, because there are some really interesting use cases now that are possible that weren't a few years ago. But for the most part, the path Zyte are going down is around us, is around more around code generation, are using machine learning models, maybe, or a combination of both. Rather than kind of having a ChatGPT. But I'm sure somebody will write one though. There might even exist one already.
Of course, AI is kind of everywhere here, also in the toothbrush. So why don't in Scrapy?
No, I'm sure somebody listening to this might make one.
And where do you see the future of Scrapy now, since you've got the Zyte API, which seems a good way to approach the future of scraping? And where do you see Scrapy instead?
There's some new features coming to Scrapy. I should probably let some of our engineers talk about it, but we're making a few, continuing on some core improvements. Like, this is still very active development. We're going to redo some of the community stuff as well, like update the website, structure the resources better, some of the learning stuff, modernize it a bit. I think like in hindsight, Python was a very good choice for this, because even as we transition from, a choice that was made to make developers very productive, it's also a good choice for generating code for web scraping. So I think it plays really well with a lot of the AI tooling that we're seeing nowadays. So yeah, I think, look, I wonder if we'll do another one of these in another 10 years, where we're still asking the same questions. So, we're still doing it that way. It's still at the core. Maybe it becomes less visible, if people are using, if you're primarily thinking about your cursor or whatever you're using to generate the code. But I still think this is a very useful library that'll probably stay at the core of it.
So a lot of people ask me if there's the chance to see a good visual Scrapy Orchestrator. I think you had something in the past about it, a product based on Scrapy D, I suppose. It was, if I remember correctly, it was such a product by Zyte, but maybe this can be a good idea if you don't know what to do in the next years.
Yeah, so we do have our Scrapy Cloud product, which lets you run Scrapy spiders in the cloud. Essentially, it provides a dashboard, job scheduling. We'll collect the output. You can view and inspect the output, download it, integrate via APIs. So this handles for Zyte all of our production web scraping workloads, and for lots of other customers who run it at large scale. Now, it's way better. It's obviously far more full featured and at a much larger scale than Scrapy D, which is essentially a server you can deploy Scrapy spiders to. It's pure open source. Scrapy Cloud isn't actually based on Scrapy D, but it solves maybe as a similar problem, but on a larger scale and with more of a user experience around it. But it's not quite a full workflow solution, right? And I think but I think the problem has been, and maybe somebody will build one, but I think what's actually happened in practice is that a lot of people have their preferred workflow solution, and the scraping is a part of it. But you don't really solve the post-processing, the data processing, etc. So what we've always tended to do is to integrate often Scrapy Cloud, in Zyte's case, with a workflow solution that will take and process that data afterwards. A lot of people, there's been some stuff with Airflow integrations into Scrapy Cloud. There's been some ones around Scrapy. I don't think there's been anything big with Scrapy itself, though. So if anybody's aware, let us know, or if they have something. Yeah, but it is a common solution because most people who do web scraping, they need to do something with the data, right? And they often need some kind of orchestration solution. Yeah.
And I mentioned before in the start of this talk, the Extract Summit events. I know that you recently doubled the event. You will make one in the US and one in Dublin. What we can expect from them? Yeah.
We've been doing these now for quite a few years. And look, it's delighted, you've obviously been there before. Yeah, look, this is kind of the in-person event, or the in-person events really. Each year we've gone, it's been better. And, you're going to get talks from, across the industry. All the main vendors are there. Every year, right? I think you know that, as well as some really interesting use cases, also some very topical stuff. So it's quite a mix. We'll do a day of hands-on developer stuff, usually one day, and then a day of talks. So you're free to attend both days, but depending on your interests. Yeah, and there's usually a social side as well. I personally, these kind of conferences, even if you know a lot of the topics already, you're bound to learn something, but people come back and they meet the same people. There's a good network, and a great atmosphere. It's really wonderful. I think there aren't many great events for what we do. It's a bit of a niche area. So to have something like this is kind of special. And we get people traveling from all around the world to attend these.
Yes, apart from the speeches that they were always interesting when I attended. Yes, the best part, in my opinion, is the networking, because, as you said, there are not so many events in this niche, and knowing in person people that maybe you are talking with via email for years, it's always nice. And yes, you always discover something more about the person, the companies, and yes, it's always interesting. I ran out of questions, so thank you, Shane, for being here, for the time that you dedicated to me and to the Web Scraping Club, and hope to see you soon at the Extract Summit.
Looking forward to it. Thank you.